Good morning. It is snowing here in Pittsburgh on a Saturday in the middle of February. It's actually snowing quite hard, and I'm supposed to head out in an hour or so to uh, go lead a meditation class, which I will do. But as I glance out the window over there, I am guessing there will be no other people braving the weather. So today I'm going to finish up the summary of Emerson from this book. Yesterday I started going through half a dozen aphorisms that are taken from Emerson's journal in the late 1860s. They're notes for a lecture, The Philosophy of the People, but they provide a really good summary of the kinds of things that occupied Emerson's thinking and his writing throughout his entire life. So the first three I'll link in the comments, and then I'm going to finish up here and kind of wrap up this reading of Emerson's biography. But first, let me just reach around here. I had forgotten to bring my coffee close at hand. On the weekends, I drink a flavored coffee, which is unusual for me. I tend to just drink coffee. I like a dark roast. I grew up in the 80s, and so my taste for coffee is like an Arabica with a really heavy roast on it, where you're really just tasting the roast, not the bean. Nowadays, the roasts tend to be lighter, and you taste more of the coffee, which is great, and I like that. But I tend, left to my own devices, I brew this, the roast flavor. I won't call it strong, because it's not that it's stronger. It's not that it's more caffeine, but it's, it favors the bitter flavor of the roast. And that is entirely a factor of when I grew up and started drinking coffee. If I grew up and started drinking coffee now, I would look for a medium roast with a lighter floral taste. Anyway, this is a flavored coffee. It's a French vanilla. I get it from the Mystic Monks, and once a month they send a pound of beans, and then I drink it on the weekends just to shift things up, just to make sure I don't get too stuck in my ways. It's delicious. Anyway, point the fourth of these selections. The reality of things is thought. It is the secret of power. All superiority is this, or related to this. Now, the reality of things is thought. I read that, and I think of the essentially romantic notion. I mean, romantic as in the Samuel Coleridge Taylor, William Wordsworth, like the romantic poets who were definitely part of Emerson's readings. Keats, Byron, the imagination, the thought is a sphere of activity that has its own regulations, its own rules, its own behavior. And although it may not be material like all of this, it is absolutely real. It is, as Emerson said, the reality of things is thought. Now, Emerson is also always interested in the idea of kind of the Platonic idea of a thought, that there exists thoughts as entities that we uncover or that we interact with or that we discover or that are revealed to us, that there's a reality of thought against which we are compelled, towards which we are compelled, against which we are constructed. Yeah. And so my take on that is this imaginative sphere, which has occupied my own thinking. I've called it the poetic ooze in other essays and videos. This idea that we are creatures, humans are creatures who generate a poetic halo simply by existing. And by poetic halo, I don't mean that we're walking around speaking in iambic pentameter or rhymed couplets. I mean that we are depositing fantasy and narrative, fiction, interpretation, dreams, hallucinations, joyous ecstasy, terrible despair, that these are all artifacts that are created and that kind of follow us like a trail, like an ooze. And then when we create art, when we write essays, when we make YouTube videos, we are deliberately venturing into that space and kind of shaping it in a way that resonates with others. But also, and this is why it's so important to create in any way, also we bring coherence to our own experience. If there were no audience, I would still write. There is no audience, and I still write. I struggle to be a better crafts person, have greater control over my writing, because that writing brings coherence to my internal thoughts and therefore to my life and therefore to the meaning of life, my life. Next point. Our whole existence is subjective. What we are, that we see, love, hate. What we are, that we see, love, and hate. A man externalizes himself in his friends and in his enemies and parasites and in his gods. So I'm tying these together in a way that Emerson may or may not have approved of. But if the reality of things is our thoughts, and if our creative activity sort of shapes this poetic ooze around us, it is also a filter through which we see the rest of the world. See to the point that we are creating what we see, what we experience. Right? It's a bit easier to imagine or to conceive of the idea that our thoughts shape how we feel about things. But what Emerson is saying here is that there's a more direct back and forth, a more direct reckoning with the universe, and that what we see shapes the friends that we bring. Now, is he saying that if I think a certain thing, I'm going to have a friend like Henry David Thoreau, that person will be called into my life? Maybe, but I think what he's definitely saying is that if you meet someone, they will take on the attributes in my mind that I have pre-stored there. People will fit into the model, whether it's fair to them or not. That's what he means by subjective, right? It maybe sounds like there's a paradox or a contradiction between the idea of the Platonic solids, the Platonic ideas that are out there, and then saying that everything is subjective. But he's really talking about, I think, the interaction between the two, and that part of what we're doing as thinkers and as readers and as YouTubers is clarifying that relationship a bit. It's certainly a big part of what I think the meditation practice is to kind of wipe clear the obscurations so that we can see more clearly what is actually here. Whether that's these general concepts that exist in the universe, whether it's the truth of the impermanence of myself, my body, whether it's the reckoning of mortality. The Dhammapada begins with statement that our mind will follow what's put into it. And that is true whether it is sort of the most mundane, literally what you eat, what you read. This is why I think social media is so pernicious. Look, I know all of this, and yet I am one of these people who spends hours a day staring at my phone, and some of it is because that's my job. Not this, not YouTube, but my job. Anyway, let me keep moving here. You are the book's book. The book's book, right? It's very meta, right? We are readers of books. And then we hop back and say we read the book, and then we have the same relationship. The book has the relationship back to us. The book, by being read, becomes a participant, a reader in its own way. Thus, an intellectual man might say with some conviction, it makes no difference what I read, because the power is this dynamic of having read, and Emerson is a voracious reader and journaler through his life, and that dynamic of reading, consuming, right? The reason I think Emerson would reject social media because of the algorithm, not because of the availability of information, but because it is so easy to lose choice in what we see. It isn't a broad swath from which we can choose. It is a flood. The robot has decided what we should see. In that case, it is not. We are not in a back and forth dialogue relationship. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up in under 15 minutes. So I have one more statement here, right? The instinct of the universe in which becoming somewhat else is the whole game of nature and death the penalty of standing still. Becoming somewhat else is the whole game of nature. Again, becoming somewhat else is the whole game of nature. We start, we're born, we live. The point of life, and right, you want to know what the meaning of life is? I think Emerson will tell you. The point of life is to learn stuff. I don't think he's going to say anything about what it should be that you learn. But what he is going to say, and what I'm interpreting, is that the word learning means something very powerful. It isn't even just reading a book and taking notes. It is having that clarity of vision to really see what's being said, to have that dynamic of the information coming into your mind clearly. So learning implies a clarity of mind that is free from obscuration. Again, Emerson doesn't use that word. That's me coming at it from a Buddhist teaching, right? But I think when Emerson talks about insight into the necessity of things, which is one of the aphorisms we talked about a few days ago, this channel of input to the self, and then the ability of the self, our mind, to navigate through all that information and create the experience yourself. Become somewhat else is to experience the ever unfolding nature of being and the universe. That, I do think, is what Emerson is saying. That might be a good place to stop. I am going to be reading more Emerson through the year. I had started reading Emerson I don't know, like carefully reading it last summer, and I'm convinced that with everything that's going on in politics, at least here where I live in America, Emerson represents a thread of American thought that we've set aside, and we're paying the price for it. Right, the level of discourse and the value of discourse and learning and thinking and reliance on that process. Remember, when Emerson says self-reliance, he isn't meaning some kind of like Ayn Randian libertarian screw society. He means that means the cultivation, it means valuing the cultivation of your experience. And our society today doesn't do that. So let us do that. And I'm going to use Emerson as a guide. I'm reading much about Lincoln and his growth as a thinker. So not so much on the political side or the war side, although both of those are fascinating. But Lincoln began as a kind of mild, passable believer, and by the end of his presidency, he had developed a concept of providence that is profound and unsettling. And I want to understand more about that. So that's part of this project here on this channel. Meditation, I'm going to share some meditation practice along the way, but Emerson's going to keep coming back in here. And I know it's not correct to say that Emerson was a Buddhist. He was certainly one of the readings he did was of Hinduism and Buddhism, but transcendentalism is not the same as Buddhism. But so what? Still going to talk about them both. Anyway, that's enough. Have a good day. Leave a comment. Drop me an email if you have any questions, criticisms, corrections. I love getting them all. So keep your wits about you.